To me, 1955's Night of the Hunter is not just a horror movie for the individual, but it's a movie that plays on the horrors of an entire country. America's fears of sex, money, and religion. A southern gothic horror that feels more like a dream and sometimes a nightmare that flows through a tale of deception and salvation. A story of the American dream, pursued by the American reality. A film that is terrifying, and I really mean that word. Rich in dread, Night of the Hunter is the American nightmare come to life on the screen, blasted in shadow and darkness. The film was adapted from David Grubb's classic of the same name, written in 1951 to 1952. It's based on the crimes of serial killer Harry Powers, who lured women through lonely heart sections in newspapers. He seduced and then married these women before killing them and emptying their bank accounts or cutting open mattresses to find hidden cash. He killed 5 women, however, is believed to have killed more, operating in the 1920s till his capture in 1931, when he was captured and executed a couple of days after his trial in 1932. The book is a solid American classic for me, and I read the book after seeing the film, but the movie has such strong imagery and performances, I'm unable to sort of give a clear assessment. I did, however, thoroughly enjoy it. But I know it's not cool to say, but in this case, I do think that the film is infinitely better than the book. The film was developed in 1953 by Paul Gregory, the producer of the film, after being sent by a copy of the literary agent of Davis Grubb. Paul fell in love with the novel and sent it on to the eventual director, Charles Laughton, who described it as a nightmarish Mother Goose story. Both Charles and Davis began working on developing the film, with Davis drawing scenes due to his background in art, which ended up being used as storyboards for the film. They brought in James Agee due to both Charles and Davis being inexperienced in script writing, and the fact that James was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, and grew up in the Depression when the film is set. He had first-hand experience in the tone of the Depression and the South that we would later see in his autobiographical novel, A Death in the Family. James would not live to see the release of Night of the Hunter due to a heart attack brought on by chain smoking and heavy drinking. He would be given a posthumous Pulitzer Prize though. The first draft of the script would be 293 pages. Way too long for a feature film, so Charles Laughton would heavily edit the script, and this was the one he used for shooting. However, Charles insisted that only James Agee was to be credited as the writer. The script ran into some trouble with the MPA, at that point called the MPPDA, and they were concerned about showing a preacher, a man of God, as an evil person, so the script adapted to make it clear that he was not a real preacher, but a clear con man impersonating a preacher. The script was approved, but did face serious backlash from various religious groups. The director Charles Laughton studied extensively silent films like Birth of a Nation from 1915, 1916's Intolerance, and The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse from 1921. He wanted to restore the power of silent films to the talkies. Night of the Hunter was the only film that Charles Laughton ever directed. He was an experienced actor and stage director, but the film, as we'll learn, was a box office flop. And despite its classic status now, this made Charles unprepared to direct for the screen after its failure. Charles, as an actor, originally wanted to take the role of Preacher Harry Powell, but was convinced otherwise. The role was offered to Gary Cooper, who turned it down, worrying that it would upset his Christian audiences and would be detrimental to his career. Both John Carradine and Laurence Olivier were considered as well. Charles eventually landed on Robert Mitchum. This was due to the fact that Charles did not hold traditional auditions, preferring to meet them for dinner and get a sense of how they fit the preacher. When Charles described the preacher as a diabolical shit, Mitchum answered, "Present," sticking his hand in the air and causing the director to burst out laughing. After a few more meetings, Laughton pushed for Mitchum, but Grubb, the producer, pushed back, saying Mitchum was too sexual an actor. But Charles Laughton insisted, "If you want to sell God, you gotta be sexy." Shelley Winters was cast alongside Mitchum as the mother, Willa Harper, and only accepted the role 2 weeks before principal shooting started. Later commenting on the role as the most thoughtful and reserved performance I ever gave. She would also describe Willa, the character, to the director on set as a fly fascinated by a spider. and she very willingly walks into his. Charles loved this image and asked her to channel it into a performance. In fact, a spider's web makes its way into the film later due to these comments. Rachel Cooper, the kindly old woman at the end of the film, was portrayed by silent film star Lillian Gish, most famous for her work with film pioneer D.W. Griffin. Gish, upon meeting the director, asked why he was taking inspiration from some of her previous work, like mentioned earlier 1916 silent masterpiece Intolerance. Charles Laughton responded, "When I first went to the movies, they sat in their seats straight and leaned forward. Now they slump down with their heads back and eat candy and popcorn. I want them to sit up straight again." According to Lillian Gish, Laughton was very unsure of himself on set, as this was his first time directing a film, and when someone would give him a suggestion, he would start talking about the fears and that his whole vision was wrong. The film was shot in 1954 over only 36 days, which is mad. Laughton insisted that the editor Robert Golden and composer Walter Schumann were on set for filming. This is quite unusual for the time, but he wanted to make sure they understood the tone and the feeling of the film. The film had a relatively low budget of $600,000, with $75,000 of this being the book rights. It was unable to shoot on locations and was shot entirely on Hollywood Soundstage at the Republic Studios and the Roland V. Lee Ranch in the San Fernando Valley. There were certain cutaway shots later and compositing shots that were shot in West Virginia on location. Due to Laughton's theatre background, he made the choice not to do traditional takes, rather to call action and let the camera go until the film roll ran out. So he did not interrupt the actors too much in a scene while the camera was reset. So it would usually take a while back in the olden days. The studio would try to convince Laughton to shoot the film entirely in colour due to its recent popularity and being seen as the cutting edge. But Laughton insisted it must be black and white. The film was shot by two separate units. One focusing on the main home, which is shrouded in darkness, and the other focusing on the children's journey, and made sure that their scenes were seen more from a child's perspective and to give this storybook dreamlike sequence. The inspiration of silent films and German expressionism is prevalent in this film. We're going to talk about Dr. Caligari's cabinet on every single video, I insist, with the use of the classic Irish shot that is seen in many silent films, which the shot had fallen out of favour with modern directors. The art direction by Hilda Brown made great use of painted shadows, and as mentioned, focusing on the children noticing things that the adults wouldn't. The sets are dreamlike and not focused on realism, with white picket fences not surrounding any home, neon signs with no store, and barns taking inspiration from, in my eyes, Andrew Reith's classic Christina's World. The score by Walter Schumann is no less haunting and dreamlike than the rest of the film, with the motif of the traditional hymn "Leaning on the Everlasting Arms" being weaved throughout the story.
Leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning.
Just a minute. Good night, Pearl. Sleep tight and don't let the bed bugs bite.
Good night, Miss Denny. Don't let the bed bugs bite.
Leaning. Leaning. Leaning on the everlasting arms.
The film released in July 1955, a commercial and critical failure. It was called a weird and intriguing endeavour. It was also indefinable in category, too scary to be a drama, too far from that period's idea of horror. As films surrounding it like Tarantula or The Creature from the Black Lagoon, it didn't exactly hold the same type of terror. The film is far more sophisticated and, to me, very modern in its sort of horror. The studio put very little money into advertising as the backlash worried them, with the UK rating it as adult only. And some Catholic dioceses denied the film's release due to its portrayal of a preacher in a negative light, as well as believing it degraded marriage, saying that any religious person should be totally offended by this film. The film, however, would see a later renaissance in the 1970s, when it was being played in revival houses and on late night TV. The legendary critic Roger Ebert singing its praises, saying, What a compelling, frightening and beautiful film it is, and how well it has survived its period. Many films of the 1950s, even the good ones, seem somewhat dated now, but by setting his story in an invented movie world outside conventional realism, Lawton gave it this sort of timelessness. It's one of the most frightening of movies with one of the most unforgettable of villains, and on both of those scores it holds up so well after 4 decades. Its reputation grew and grew, being included in many top film lists, including being named the 71st greatest movie of all time by Empire magazine in 2012, out of a total of 500 films. Not bad for a film that was a commercial and critical failure when it came out. Sight and Sound putting it at the 25th best ever movie made, and the Library of Congress deemed Night of the Hunter to be culturally, historically or aesthetically significant and selected the film for preservation in its National Film Registry in 1992. While you may not have seen the film, its inspiration can be felt in many modern classics. Its status grew with people like Spike Lee and his classic film Do the Right Thing. The character Radio Raheem wears love and hate knuckle dusters in homage to the preacher's tattoos, as well as almost giving a verbatim copy of his famous left hand, right hand speech.
Let me tell you the story of right hand, left hand.
Would you like me to tell you the little story of right hand, left hand?
It's a tale of good and evil.
The story of good and evil?
Looks like the right hand love is finished. But hold on, stop the presses, the right hand's coming back. Yeah, he got the left hand on the ropes now, that's right. Yeah, ooh, it's a devastating right and hate is hurt.
Old brother left hand hates a fighting, and it looks like love's a goner. But wait a minute. Hot dog loves a winning.
Down! Ooh, left hand hate KO'd by love.
Yes, sirree. It's love that won. And old left-hand hate is down for the count.
The Coen brothers taking the visual style of the children's journey down the river into 2010's western True Grit, with the score using the preacher's hymn of Leaning on the Everlasting Arms throughout it.
I'm leaning on the everlasting arms.
Even in the Coen brothers comedies, The Big Lebowski's classic line, "The dude abides," is in reference to the closing line of the film. They abide and they endure.
They abide and they endure.
The dude abides.
It's even seeped its way into some of the most popular TV shows. In Better Call Saul's 3rd season episode, Fall, we see Night of the Hunter playing in the back of a retirement home as Jimmy or Saul attempts to lie to a number of his own clients, using the left hand, right hand speech, imitating another charismatic but duplicitous character in The Preacher. Now, before I get onto the plot and themes of the film, I do want to give a quick spoiler warning for the film. If you haven't seen it, I do implore you to go out and watch it. It's an hour and a half, it's not some 4-hour masterpiece that you've got to sit down and watch. It is a cinematic genius at work and everyone should experience it. But if you're okay with spoilers, then let's talk about Night of the Hunter. The film is set in Depression-era West Virginia and focuses on the battle between good in our two key protagonists, the two children John and Pearl Harper, played by Billy Chapin, and Sally Jane Bruce. Their father, played by Peter Graves, who most of you will know from, well, this.
You ever seen a grown man naked?
Is on hard times during the Great Depression and out of a job. He is stretched to breaking point and fed up with the lack of opportunities, so goes to rob a local bank, taking over $10,000. He flees but is caught up with not before getting home and instructing his son John to hide all the ill-gotten gains and to never ever tell a soul until he turns 18, at which point all the money will be his and his sister Pearl's. His father is sent to prison and set to be executed, but is put in a cell with a preacher, caught with a stolen car in a house of ill repute. This is the preacher, Harry Powell, who has cut a path across Appalachia, killing lonely hearts with his charm and switchblade. Upon the preacher's release from the prison and the dad's execution, the preacher charms his way into the family. The film plays heavily on societal pressures that women, especially single women, faced in the 1920s.
Harry better look sharper. Some smart sister between here and Captina's gonna snap him up right from under her nose.
Shelley Winter's performance is designed to bring the worst out of men, something she would later use in 1962's Lolita, directed by Stanley Kubrick. An eagerness draped in naivety, pressured by her community not to be alone. She resigns herself to marriage and to the preacher, but leans into his charm and raw charisma, culminating on their honeymoon phase when she is preparing to perform, to use a 1920s phrase, her wifely duties, only to be lambasted and scolded by the preacher, made to feel shame like many women are, and any sense of sexual desire or requirements of gratification to be...
Harry,
I was praying.
I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought...
You thought, Willa, that the moment you walked in that door, I'd start to pawing you in that abominable way that men are supposed to do on their wedding night. Ain't that right now?
No.
I think it's time we made one thing perfectly clear, Willa. Marriage to me represents a blending of two spirits in the sight of heaven.
Stamped out. Honestly, the feeling of abuse in the honeymoon scene is far beyond what was standard for the years this film was released. It cuts a real terror that women have felt and still feel in relationships to this day. Willa is filled with the religious fervour that the preacher needs to throw her off the scent of the money, preaching about her and her deceased husband's sins.
Look at yourself. What do you see, girl? You see the body of a woman, the temple of creation and motherhood. You see the flesh of Eve that man since Adam has profaned. That body was meant for begetting children. It was not meant for the lust of men. Do you want more children, Willa?
No.
It's the business of this marriage to mind those two you have now, not to beget more.
Yes.
All right, you can get in bed now. Stop shivering.
Help me to get clean, so I can be what Harry wants me to be.
The only two who know about the money is John and Pearl. We learn that it's stuffed in Pearl's doll. The preacher knows John knows the location of the money, and his charm does not work on John. His right hand of love cannot manipulate John, so he turns to the left to hate. Willa catches the preacher chasing her son about the money. They get into an argument, and through her deep religious manipulation, she leads herself to accepting her fate, martyring herself and accepting death at the hands of the preacher and his switchblade. Not with the hateful left hand, but with the loving right. She accepts her death with a halo of light placed around her head. Willa is calm and ready to die, as Harry Powell lurks in the wide shot, pulled long with elevated angular ceilings like that of a cathedral. His underlying character of hate surpasses his supposed cool calmness he uses in public as he kills Willa. The preacher heads to town to tell the ice cream shop owner to spread the lie that she has left a note abandoning him and the children. But we cut to a ghostly image of Willa suspended in seaweed and cold dark water in the car and her nightgown. An indifferent river, her blonde hair waving like the seaweed in an eerie silence, only to be interrupted by the preacher singing his hymn, leaning on the everlasting arm. Kids eventually flee after trapping the preacher in the basement and drifting down the unforgiving river, under the watch of nocturnal predators, safe only upon their raft. Eventually, they make it to a barn, only to be stalked in silhouette in the early morning dawn by the preacher singing his tune on horseback, with John remarking, "Don't he ever sleep?" They flee this unstoppable force and drift further down the mighty river, sleeping guided only by the unseen current of the water, drifting into the reeds of the riverbank, much like the biblical Old Testament story of Moses. They are collected by the stern but kind Miss Rachel Cooper, played, as mentioned above, by silent film star Lillian Gash, welcoming the two orphans to the already packed family of abandoned children. A true woman of God and kindness, not for profit, but for the action of protecting children. It's a hard world for the little things, she says. It's something she truly, truly believes and seeks to rectify. Having lost contact with her own son, she seeks to be a tree, the branches for many lost little birds, to do something good in this old world. She teaches the children from the Bible and allows John, who has been mature and had to man up for his young sister, to be what he truly is, a lost, scared child, in need of a warm bed, a hug, a bedtime story, and even a firm hand to guide him. It's a real forward-thinking attitude on how Night of the Hunter depicts societal pressures of both men to be tough and women to be weak. It's beyond its years in one of the reasons it holds up so unbelievably well to me. The preacher eventually comes across the oldest of the orphans, Ruby, who, like many girls that age, sneaks out of the house, out of the sight of her parents, in this case Miss Cooper. She goes to meet her crush, or what passes as a bad boy in 1920s America, approaches her, but he is brushed aside by the man, the preacher. A man who knows how hard a world it is for the little things, much like Miss Cooper, but he chooses to use that for his advantage, rather than to protect. A man who knows how hard the world is for the little things, and how easy, naive young women like Ruby and Willa are to manipulate. He's a wolf in a suit and tie, saying, "Kid, you can trust me." Charming southern drawl and sunken eyes, buying goodwill with a milkshake. Through his charm, he gets Ruby to reveal that the Harpers are staying with her and leaves without a second word to her, throwing her away once he has what he wants. The preacher turns up at the storybook home to the stoop of Miss Rachel Cooper, who has seen men with silver tongues like him before, and his charms which fall flat in the face of a woman, not a girl.
The sights and sounds them innocent little babes has heard in the dens of perdition where she dragged them.
Right funny, ain't it, how they rode all the way upriver in a 10-foot John boat?
Are they well, Miss Cooper?
A sight better than they was.
Sussing him out in an instant and making him seem almost buffoonish, and not some master manipulator, but a child lying, and lying badly. In the face of Miss Cooper's faith and strength, he is nothing, a true contrast of good versus evil. Scaring him away, he returns in the dead of night to intimidate the family, being the monster knocking on the door, the shadow on the walls, the preacher singing a hymn into the night air. Miss Cooper is not some old fuddy-duddy who can be bashed back and put into place by anyone, and most certainly not by a sweet talker like the preacher. But that does not mean she is not full of kindness and love. She is not for manipulation. The preacher is the left hand, a monster, evil, and Miss Cooper is the right, shielding those little ones, by extension the audience, from this monster, from the evil, from the darkness. She is illuminated on her porch as she protects her little heaven from the barbarian at the gates in the form of the preacher, joining in with his hymn. Not in the way he uses it as a method of intimidation, but as a beacon of light, the words of power that show her unwavering faith and devotion to the Lord and the children. But she knows words are not enough to fight this evil, and that's why the shotgun sits across her lap. The preacher eventually makes his way through the darkness and into the home in a standoff with Miss Cooper, and she shoots him, and he hollers his way all the way to the barn in, again, a buffoonish, detrimental way. Miss Cooper calls the police and relays a quote that sounds like something more that there is an animal in a barn than a man. "Get your state troopers out to my place. I've got something trapped in my barn." Harry Powell, the preacher, is arrested in front of John, invoking the imagery of his father's arrest at the start of the film. He is tried in court and almost killed by a lynch mob, but he is eventually executed a few days later after the trial. We end with Miss Cooper enjoying a Christmas morning, a day tied intrinsically to faith, which weaves its way throughout this entire masterpiece. With Miss Cooper speaking directly to us down the lens like she would a child, with her final words of assurance on the resilience of the children. They abide and they endure.
They abide and they endure.
Night of the Hunter is a classic and a true horror. It follows the journey of American optimism, pushed forth like a bubble upon the tide of empire out west, drifting upon the river in a dreamlike state to a better place. A battle of fervour versus faith, kindness versus evil, love versus hate, the left hand versus the right. It is a film everyone should see, a depiction of hope through the eyes of the little ones caught up by the old and the wicked. But they abide and they endure. Thanks for watching. Have a good day now.